Hi, have a nice listen. Don't forget to like and comment on what you think of this story. Looking back, the signs were always there. The subtle shifts in behavior, the fleeting looks of guilt, and the constant excuses that sounded just a little too perfect. But at the time, I ignored them. Why wouldn't I? Rachel was my wife, my partner for life. We had built everything together from the ground up. A solid marriage, 2 kids, a nice house in the suburbs. On the surface, everything seemed fine, perfect, even. For a long time, I didn't notice the cracks. Or maybe I didn't want to notice them. It was during the spring of last year when things started to change. Rachel had just opened her own boutique downtown, and she threw herself into it full force. She was always busy with work, ordering inventory, setting up meetings with vendors, and staying late at the shop to catch up on paperwork. I didn't mind at first. In fact, I was proud of her. I thought her ambition was a good thing. We were a team, after all, and if she wanted to chase her dreams, I was all for it. But looking back now, I realize her ambition wasn't the problem. It was something else entirely. At first, it was little things. She'd leave her phone face down on the kitchen counter when we were home, something she never used to do. And when it buzzed, she'd quickly grab it and disappear into another room. She said it was just work, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Rachel wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend. We'd been married for over 10 years, and if there was one thing I thought we had, it was trust. So when she'd cancel plans or miss a family dinner to meet a client or run some last-minute errands, I didn't question it. Not at first, but the absences became more frequent. The excuses started piling up. "I'm swamped with work," she'd say. "Just a couple more weeks, and things will calm down." I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. I tried to brush off the creeping doubts. Every marriage goes through phases, right? She was just stressed from work. We'd be fine. But then there were the late-night phone calls she would take in hushed tones, always out of earshot. I'd ask her about them, and she'd laugh it off, saying it was just some difficult customer or a vendor giving her trouble. I never pushed. I trusted her. Maybe I was naive. Then came the change in her appearance. Rachel had always taken care of herself, but recently, she had started dressing differently, more provocatively, more like the woman I had met years ago. Not the mother of 2 who used to throw her hair in a messy bun and wear yoga pants around the house. At first, I thought she was just feeling good about herself. She'd lost a bit of weight, started going to the gym regularly. I didn't think much of it, but then it became obvious that her new look wasn't for me. She'd walk in the door after these supposed work meetings, wearing a tight dress and heels, her hair perfectly styled, and I couldn't help but wonder, who was she really trying to impress? The doubts grew louder in my mind, but I shoved them down. I didn't want to believe it. Rachel had never given me any reason to think she'd stray. We had a good life, didn't we? So, I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But there's only so much doubt a man can swallow before it starts eating him alive. The tipping point came on a night I'll never forget. We had dinner plans with our usual group of friends, Jack and Megan, Chris and Lauren. These were people we'd known for years, friends we considered family. But even at dinner, Rachel was acting strange. She barely touched her food, kept checking her phone under the table, and seemed to zone out whenever someone spoke to her. Every time I tried to ask if something was wrong, she'd smile and say she was just tired. But I wasn't buying it anymore. The breaking point came when, later that night, after everyone had gone home, I noticed her phone buzz again. This time, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to keep playing the fool. She was in the bathroom, so I grabbed her phone off the counter, heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I was still telling myself it was probably nothing. Then I saw the name, Derek. It wasn't the first time I'd seen the name pop up in her messages, but I had assumed he was just some client from the boutique. But these weren't client messages. No, These were something else entirely. The texts were flirty, playful, and explicit in ways that made my stomach turn. They were planning to meet up again soon, Derek telling her how much he missed her, how much he wanted to make up for lost time. My hands shook as I scrolled further. There were photos, too. Ones I wish I could erase from my memory. Rachel sending pictures I'd never seen her take for me. Derek responding with equally inappropriate ones of his own. My head swam. This couldn't be real. My wife, the mother of my children, was having an affair. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I scrolled through the messages, something else caught my eye. There were mentions of someone else, cryptic comments that made my blood run cold. "He's starting to catch on," Derek had texted. "We need to be careful." Who was he talking about? Was it me? Was I the fool they were laughing at behind my back? And then another message popped up, from someone I hadn't expected to see, Lauren, Chris's wife. The messages were brief, but the implications were clear. Lauren was in on this too. I couldn't believe it. I scrolled further, but the texts ended abruptly after that. I sat there, stunned, staring at the screen in disbelief. Rachel came out of the bathroom, drying her hands on a towel. When she saw me standing there, her face paled. "What are you doing with my phone?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in her voice. I held it up, the messages still open for her to see. "Care to explain this?" For a moment, she froze, her face going pale. Then, like flipping a switch, her expression changed, calm, collected. "It's not what you think." Those words, they made my blood boil. Not what I think. What else could it possibly be? But before I could say another word, she walked past me, grabbed the phone from my hand, and locked herself in the bedroom. That's when I knew. I wasn't just dealing with a simple affair. Something bigger was going on, and I needed to find out what. The rest of the night passed in silence. Rachel locked herself in the bedroom while I sat on the couch, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. My thoughts were running wild, jumping from one dark conclusion to the next. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My wife, cheating on me, and not just with some random guy, but with help from Lauren, a close friend. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no idea what I was up against. I barely slept, and when the sun rose, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront Rachel again. Not yet. I needed to gather more information, figure out just how deep this went. There were too many unanswered questions. Why was Lauren involved? Did Chris know? And what exactly did Rachel and Derek think I was catching on to? The first thing I did was avoid Rachel. I didn't want to deal with her excuses, her deflections, not while I was still processing everything. She tried to act normal the next morning, like we hadn't just had the most awkward, tension-filled night of our lives. She made breakfast, kissed the kids goodbye, and left for work like nothing had happened. I watched her go, wondering how long she could keep up this charade. But more importantly, I wondered how long I could. I knew one thing for sure. I needed to talk to someone who could give me answers. And the first person I thought of was Chris. Chris and I had been best friends since college. We'd been through everything together: drunken parties, first jobs, weddings, kids. If there was one person I could trust to give me the truth, it was him. But I couldn't just come out and accuse his wife of being part of some twisted conspiracy without proof. No, I had to approach this carefully. That afternoon, I called Chris and asked if he wanted to grab a beer. He was always down for a beer. We met at the local bar we used to frequent in our younger days. It felt strange, like the calm before the storm. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew this conversation was going to change everything. "So, how's it going?" Chris asked after we ordered, leaning back in his chair. He was his usual laid-back self, sipping on his beer like life was still simple. Meanwhile, my stomach was in knots. "Not great, man," I said, deciding to test the waters. "Rachel and I had a fight last night." Things have been kind of weird between us lately. Chris raised an eyebrow. Weird how? I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She's been distant, working late a lot, you know? I feel like she's hiding something. He took another sip, nodding slowly. Yeah, that sucks, man. I've noticed Lauren's been a bit off too. She's been hanging out with Rachel more than usual, but I figured it was just a girl thing. My heart raced. This was my opening. You ever notice anything strange about them? Like, maybe they're up to something? Chris gave me a confused look, clearly not following. What do you mean? I hesitated, then decided to go for it. I saw some messages on Rachel's phone. She's been talking to this guy, Derek, and Lauren's involved too. I don't know how or why, but I saw her name come up in the messages. For a moment, Chris just stared at me. I expected him to laugh, maybe get defensive, but instead, his face went pale. He set his beard down, his hand shaking slightly. What did you see, exactly? The change in his demeanor caught me off guard. Just some texts. It looked like Rachel and Derek were planning something, and Lauren knew about it. I'm not sure what's going on, but it's more than just an affair, Chris. There's something else. Chris didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked down at his hands, then back at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Jake, there's something you should know. I didn't think it was real at first, but I've been hearing things. Hearing things? I leaned in closer, my pulse quickening. What kind of things? He glanced around the bar, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Then, in a low voice, he said, about Derek. He's not just some random guy. He's dangerous. People in town have been talking. I heard he's involved in stuff. Bad stuff. My throat went dry. What do you mean, bad stuff? Like criminal stuff, Chris whispered. Shady business deals, fraud, maybe worse. I don't know the details, but I've heard his name come up a few times. And if Lauren and Rachel are involved with him, we're in deep shit. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was spiraling out of control faster than I could handle. Why the hell didn't you tell me this sooner? Chris shook his head. I didn't think it was real. People gossip, you know? But if Rachel's texting him and Lauren's in on it too. He trailed off, rubbing his temples. We need to figure this out, Jake, before it gets worse. The conversation left me reeling. I had come looking for answers, but all I'd found were more questions. Derek wasn't just some fling. He was dangerous, and somehow my wife and our friends were mixed up in it. But how deep did this go? And what was Rachel really hiding? By the time I got home, my mind was racing. Rachel wasn't back yet, so I had time to think. If Chris was right, then I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was dealing with something bigger, something that could destroy not just my marriage, but my entire life. I needed to know more, and I needed to know it fast. That night, when Rachel came home, she tried to act normal again, but I couldn't play along anymore. I had to confront her. Maybe not about Derek, not yet, but about Lauren, about what she knew. I needed to rattle her, see if she'd slip up. So, I had a beer with Chris today, I said casually as we sat down for dinner. Rachel barely looked up from her plate. Oh, how's he doing? I watched her carefully, looking for any sign of guilt. He's fine. We talked about Lauren, though. He mentioned she's been acting strange lately, hanging out with you a lot. For a split second, Rachel froze. It was so brief, anyone else would have missed it, but I saw it. She quickly recovered, smiling as she took a sip of her wine. Yeah, she's been going through some stuff. I've just been trying to be there for her. I nodded, keeping my tone light. What kind of stuff? Rachel shrugged. You know, marriage stuff. Same as everyone. I wanted to push her, to ask more, but I knew I had to be careful. If I showed my hand too soon, she'd shut down completely. No, I had to play this smart. I had to be patient. But one thing was clear. I was running out of time. I couldn't let it go. Rachel's lie about Lauren was too obvious. Sure, couples have problems, but if Lauren's marriage was on the rocks, Chris would have said something. He was my best friend, and we shared everything. So, if Rachel was trying to cover for Lauren, it meant she was hiding something bigger. I needed proof, concrete evidence to break this whole thing wide open. That night, as Rachel showered, I made my move. I grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter. She hadn't locked it again, probably thinking I wouldn't dare snoop after the last time. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through her messages. Derek's name popped up again in her recent conversations. I opened the thread, my heart pounding, and what I saw made my stomach drop. There were texts from earlier that day. They weren't just flirting anymore. This was something far worse. They were planning another meetup. Tomorrow night, to be exact. Derek, tomorrow, 8 p.m. You know the spot. Don't forget the money. We can't mess this up. Rachel, I know. It'll be fine. No one suspects a thing. I've got it covered. Money? What the hell were they talking about? I scrolled back further, but the messages got even more cryptic. Phrases like the deal, the shipment, and keeping him in the dark made me feel like I was reading a mobster's playbook. This wasn't just about their affair. They were involved in something illegal, something dangerous, and I had no idea how deep it went. As I scrolled through the messages, trying to make sense of the situation, my mind raced. Were they running some kind of scam? Was Rachel laundering money through her boutique? And why did she think I wouldn't figure it out? The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together yet, but one thing was clear. I wasn't dealing with just a cheating wife anymore. I was dealing with a criminal. And the deeper I went, the more dangerous this became. The next morning, I could barely look at her. We sat at the breakfast table, our two kids blissfully unaware of the tension building between their parents. Rachel acted like nothing had changed, sipping her coffee and making small talk about the boutique and the upcoming weekend plans. I forced myself to smile, to play along, but every time she opened her mouth, all I could think about were those texts with Derek. The lies, the betrayal, the danger. I didn't know what to do. If I confronted her outright, she'd deny everything or worse. She might run. I had to gather more evidence, figure out what this deal was, and who else was involved. But time was running out. She was meeting Derek that night, and if I didn't act soon, I might lose my chance to expose them both. I decided to follow her. That evening, I told her I had to stay late at work. She barely even acknowledged it, too wrapped up in her own plans. I kissed the kids goodbye, grabbed my coat, and headed out the door, but I didn't go to work. Instead, I parked down the street and waited. My pulse quickened when I saw Rachel leave the house an hour later, dressed far too nice for what she claimed was a girls' night out. I followed her, keeping a safe distance as she drove across town. My mind was racing, a mixture of anger and fear bubbling inside me. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Rachel pulled into a quiet parking lot behind a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place I'd never been, and it looked like the kind of place where bad things happened. The kind of place you didn't go unless you had something to hide. She parked her car, got out, and glanced around before disappearing into the building. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I tried to decide what to do next. Should I call the cops? Burst in and confront her? I didn't have a plan, just a gut feeling that whatever was happening inside that warehouse was far worse than I could imagine. I waited for a few minutes, my heart pounding in my chest, before deciding to follow her in. I wasn't going to sit back and let her get away with this. Not anymore. I got out of my car, sticking to the shadows as I approached the side entrance of the warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and as I stepped inside, the cold, damp air hit me like a wave. The place was dimly lit, the kind of atmosphere that screamed illegal activity. I could hear voices echoing down the hall. I followed the sounds, moving as quietly as I could. The deeper I went into the building, the more nervous I became. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and fury. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew I had to see it for myself. I had to know just how far Rachel had fallen. Finally, I found her. She was standing in a large, open room, surrounded by a group of men. Derek was there, of course, standing far too close to her for my liking. He was tall, muscular, with that smug look that made my blood boil. But what caught my attention wasn't him. It was the stacks of cash laid out on the table in front of them. Thousands of dollars, more than I'd ever seen in one place. And then I saw the boxes. Large, wooden crates lined up along the far wall. One of the men opened a crate, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw what was inside. Weapons. Rachel was mixed up in an arms deal. I stood there, frozen in disbelief. My wife, was involved in something far worse than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just some sleazy affair. She was part of a criminal operation, and by the looks of it, she was in deep. I wanted to storm in, to scream at her, to demand answers. But I knew I couldn't. Not here. Not like this. I had to be smart. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. Once I was far enough from the room, I turned and bolted back to my car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing with a million different thoughts. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Call the cops? Confront her? Was I even safe anymore? One thing was clear. Rachel wasn't the woman I thought she was. And if I didn't act fast, this whole situation was going to spiral out of control, maybe even cost me my life. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, so calm and collected amidst the chaos. How long had she been hiding this side of herself from me? And how far was she willing to go to protect her secret? The worst part was, I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out. The drive home felt like I was in a trance, my mind replaying everything I'd just seen. Rachel standing with those men, the stacks of money, the weapons. I could hardly believe it. My wife wasn't just having an affair. She was neck-deep in something criminal, something dangerous. But the worst part? I didn't know what to do about it. How do you even begin to confront your wife when you know she's involved in something that could land her in prison? Or worse. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. Every so often, I'd glance over at Rachel, who was fast asleep beside me. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, but I knew better now. The woman I married was a stranger. She had secrets, dark, dangerous secrets, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go to keep them hidden. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more information, proof that I could use not only to protect myself but also to ensure that when the hammer came down, it wouldn't crush me too. If Rachel was involved in an arms deal, there had to be more evidence, something I could take to the authorities. But I couldn't tip her off. Not until I had something solid. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and quiet investigation. I kept up the facade of being the oblivious husband, but inside, I was on high alert. Every move Rachel made was under scrutiny. Every text, every phone call, none of it escaped my attention. I was playing detective in my own home, trying to piece together the puzzle of her double life. One night, after she went to bed early claiming she was exhausted from work, I seized the opportunity to dig deeper. I grabbed her laptop from the kitchen counter and powered it on. Rachel was careful. Most of her browser history had been cleared, and her emails didn't show anything suspicious. But there was one thing she hadn't covered up. A hidden folder on her desktop, cleverly labeled under an innocuous name. It looked like a folder for business documents, taxes, inventory records, invoices. I clicked on it. What I found inside made my blood run cold. There were spreadsheets, payment logs, and emails. Emails between her and Derek discussing shipments of weapons, deals with foreign buyers, and payments laundered through her boutique. She had been using her business as a front, moving money around in a way that would make it look legitimate. And from the looks of it, she had been doing this for months. Hell, maybe even years. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the emails. I was holding the proof I needed, the evidence that could blow her operation wide open. But what now? Should I go to the police? Confront her? And what about the kids? If Rachel went down, their lives would be shattered. I couldn't let them become collateral damage in this mess. I needed a plan, and I needed one fast. The next day, I called Chris again, asking him to meet me at the bar. I hadn't told him everything the last time we talked. I wasn't sure if he could handle it, but now I had no choice. I had to bring him in. He deserved to know the truth about what his wife was involved in too. We sat in our usual spot, beers in hand. But this time the conversation wasn't lighthearted. "Chris, I've got to tell you something," I began, my voice low. "And it's not just about Rachel. It's about Lauren too." Chris set his beer down, his expression serious. "What's going on, Jake? You've been acting weird lately." I took a deep breath and leaned in closer. "Rachel and Lauren, they're involved in something bad, something criminal." He stared at me, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the emails I had found, the logs, the payment records. His face paled as he scrolled through the evidence, his hands trembling slightly. "This can't be real," he muttered. "Lauren wouldn't. She couldn't be mixed up in something like this." "I wish it wasn't real, but it is," I said, my voice grim. "I saw them, Chris. I followed Rachel to a meeting with Derek. They were making deals, arms deals." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Arms deals? Like guns?" I nodded. "Yeah, and from what I've seen, it's big. They've been using Rachel's boutique to launder the money. And Lauren, she's in it too, man. I don't know how deep, but she's involved." Chris rubbed his face with both hands, clearly trying to process what I was telling him. "I don't know what to do, Jake. This can't be happening. We can't just sit back and do nothing," I said firmly. "We have to figure out a way to stop them. I've got enough proof here to take to the cops, but if we go that route, Rachel and Lauren are both going down. The kids will be dragged into it. Their lives will be ruined." Chris nodded slowly, his face ashen. "We've got to be smart about this." For the next few hours, we hashed out a plan. We couldn't just blow the whistle without knowing all the players involved. Rachel and Lauren were part of something bigger, something that stretched far beyond our sleepy little town. If we acted too soon, we could end up in more danger than we already were. We needed to know who else was involved, where the money was going, and who Derek really was. But more than anything, we needed to protect our families. Over the next few days, Chris and I quietly kept digging, gathering information, putting together the pieces of the puzzle. I began to feel like I was living a double life, one where I had to pretend everything was fine at home while secretly planning how to bring my wife's criminal empire crashing down. Rachel continued to act like the perfect wife, completely unaware of how close I was to exposing her. Then, one evening, everything changed. It was late, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when Rachel's phone buzzed on the counter. She was upstairs putting the kids to bed, so I grabbed the phone and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Derek. "Derek, we need to move the shipment. Cops are sniffing around. Meet tomorrow night, same place." My heart skipped a beat. The cops were already getting close, which meant time was running out for Rachel and Lauren. And if they found out I knew, well, I didn't want to think about what Derek might do. He didn't strike me as the type of guy who let loose ends stay loose for long. I put the phone down and stared at it, my pulse racing. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. They were planning another meeting, and this time, I had to be there. But not alone. I needed backup, someone who could help me put an end to this once and for all. As I stood there, my mind racing with 100 different scenarios, I realized there was only one person I could turn to. I needed to get the cops involved. I wasn't going to let this go any further. Rachel's lies had gone on long enough. Tomorrow night, I was going to take her down, no matter what it took. The next day, I barely managed to keep myself together. The tension in my chest felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. Rachel went about her day as if everything was normal, completely unaware that her whole world was about to collapse. I kept playing the role of the clueless husband, though each passing hour felt like an eternity. I had already made up my mind. I was going to the cops, but I had to do it right. This wasn't something that could be handled by a patrol car showing up at our front door. I needed someone in law enforcement who could see the bigger picture, someone who would take this seriously. That's why I called Detective Mike Harris. Harris was a no-nonsense cop, the kind of guy who didn't mess around. We'd crossed paths once before, years ago, when I witnessed a minor crime. He gave me his card, told me to call if I ever needed help. I dug through old boxes until I found it, and after staring at it for a few minutes, I dialed the number. "Detective Harris," his gruff voice answered. "It's Jake Donovan," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "I don't know if you remember me, but we met a few years back." There was a pause, and then he replied, "Yeah, I remember." "What's going on, Jake?" "I've got a situation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My wife, she's involved in something bad. Arms deals. There's a meeting tonight, and I have proof. But I need help. This is way bigger than me." There was another pause on the other end of the line, and then Harris said, "Where and when?" I gave him the details of the warehouse and the time of the meeting. He didn't ask many questions, which made me think he believed me more than I expected. Maybe he'd dealt with enough of these cases to recognize when someone was in over their head. He told me to stay out of sight and leave the rest to him. A team would be there to handle it. By the time evening rolled around, my nerves were frayed. Rachel kissed the kids goodnight, then kissed me on the cheek, saying she had another girls' night. I fought the urge to call her out right there, to scream that I knew everything. But I bit my tongue. There would be time for that later, after everything blew up in her face. Once she was gone, I grabbed my jacket and headed out. I wasn't going to stay at home and wait. I needed to see this through. If things went south, I had to be there to make sure she didn't slip away. I parked my car a block away from the warehouse, my heart pounding in my chest. The night was cold, and the quiet streets made everything feel eerie. I waited, glancing at my watch every few minutes. Harris had promised his team would be in place before the meeting started. They were supposed to be watching from a distance, ready to move in as soon as the deal went down. I just hoped everything would go according to plan. But the way things had been going, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong. I saw Rachel's car pull into the parking lot just after 8. My stomach churned as she got out, looking as calm and collected as ever. She was carrying a large duffel bag, which I assumed was full of money. She disappeared inside the warehouse, and I gripped the steering wheel, trying to keep my hands from shaking. This was it, the final move. A few minutes later, Derek's car pulled in. He got out, flanked by 2 men I hadn't seen before. Big guys, the kind that looked like they could break someone in half without breaking a sweat. They followed him inside, and I could feel my pulse racing. Where were the cops? Another 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I checked my phone for any messages from Harris, but there was nothing. I was starting to panic. Had they bailed on me? Had something gone wrong? Suddenly, the door to the warehouse flew open. Derek stormed out, shouting angrily into his phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but whatever it was, he was pissed. Rachel followed him out, looking shaken. Something was happening inside that I didn't understand. I ducked down in my seat, trying to stay out of sight as they moved toward Derek's car. Then I saw it. One of the men who had come with Derek was carrying one of the wooden crates I'd seen before, the ones filled with weapons. But something about this crate was different. The way they were treating it, the urgency with which they were moving. It was as if this crate held something more valuable, more dangerous. I couldn't sit there any longer. I grabbed my phone and called Harris. What the hell is going on? I whispered harshly into the phone. They're moving something, and it's not just weapons. This is bigger than you thought. We're close, Harris replied. Stay put. We'll be there any minute. But I didn't have a minute. Derek and his men were loading the crate into the back of his car. If they got away, I had no idea what would happen next. I watched, helpless, as Rachel stood off to the side, clearly uneasy with how things were unfolding. She looked like she was in over her head too, like she didn't realize just how deep she had gotten into this mess. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud bang. Gunfire. It came from inside the warehouse, and suddenly, everything was chaos. Derek's men drew their guns, yelling at Rachel to get in the car. She froze, her face pale, and in that moment, I saw the truth. She wasn't just guilty. She was scared. She had no idea what was happening, no idea how dangerous things had become. That's when the police arrived. Squad cars screeched into the parking lot, lights flashing, sirens blaring. Derek and his men scrambled to get away, but they were quickly surrounded. The cops moved in fast, guns drawn, and within seconds, it was over. Derek and his crew were arrested, and the crate, whatever was in it, was seized by the police. Rachel stood there, frozen in shock as the officers handcuffed her and led her to one of the squad cars. She didn't resist. She didn't even speak. She just looked broken. I stayed in my car, watching as my wife, the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, was taken away in handcuffs. The weight of everything hit me all at once, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. This was the end. There was no going back now. I got out of the car as Detective Harris approached me. He looked grim, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes. "You did the right thing, Jake," he said quietly. "We'll take it from here." I nodded, but it didn't feel like the right thing. It felt like the end of a nightmare, one I hadn't woken up from yet. As I watched Rachel disappear into the back of the police car, I realized that the woman I thought I knew had been gone for a long time. The person standing in her place was a stranger, someone who had lied to me, betrayed me, and put our entire family in danger. And now, she was gone. In the days that followed, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. The police made several more arrests connected to the arms smuggling ring, and the investigation expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. They found more weapons, money, and even links to international crime syndicates. Rachel had gotten herself tangled in a web so much larger than I ever thought possible. I had no idea how she'd managed to keep it hidden for so long. I was left to deal with the fallout at home. The kids, thankfully, were too young to fully understand what was happening. They asked why Mom wasn't coming home, and I had to come up with excuses: Mom's away for work, or she's visiting a friend. But each time I said it, it felt like a knife in my chest. Eventually, I knew I couldn't keep lying to them. So, one evening, after I tucked them into bed, I sat down with them and tried to explain. I didn't go into the details, of course. How could I tell my kids their mom was involved in arms smuggling? Instead, I told them that Mom had made some mistakes, and she needed time away to fix things. That seemed to satisfy them for now, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They missed her, and no matter what she'd done, she was still their mother. That was something I couldn't take away from them. The house felt eerily quiet after that. Every corner, every room, every piece of furniture held memories of Rachel. Memories I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. We'd built a life together in this house, and now, all of it seemed like a lie. I found myself walking through the halls at night, staring at pictures of us on vacations, family dinners, birthdays, and holidays. Looking back, I wondered if there had been signs that I missed, small clues that could have hinted at the double life she was living. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that even if there had been, I never would have believed it. Rachel was always so good at hiding the truth. One evening, a few weeks after the arrests, I received a call from Rachel's lawyer. He was a sharp, no-nonsense kind of guy, the type who could probably get someone out of a murder charge if they paid him enough. He wanted to discuss the upcoming trial and the possibility of a plea deal. Apparently, Rachel was cooperating with the authorities, giving them information on others involved in exchange for a lighter sentence. A plea deal? I scoffed into the phone. You mean she's just going to get a slap on the wrist for everything she did? The lawyer sighed. She's not getting off easy, Mr. Donovan. She's facing serious charges. But the more she cooperates, the better chance she has of reducing her sentence. It's in her best interest. I gripped the phone tighter, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. What about her family? Her kids? What about us? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I understand this is difficult, but Rachel wants to make sure the kids are taken care of. She's asked that you have full custody. She doesn't want to disrupt their lives any more than they already have been. Full custody. It should have been a relief, but all I felt was emptiness. Rachel had made the decision for me. She had thrown away her life with us, and now, she wanted to play the martyr by making sure I had the kids? It didn't feel like a favor. It felt like abandonment. After the call, I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the blank TV screen. The weight of everything was crushing down on me. The betrayal, the lies, the danger Rachel had put us in. It all felt so overwhelming. And yet, I had to keep going. I had to pick up the pieces, not just for myself, but for the kids. One day, as I was going through some of Rachel's things, I found an old journal tucked away in the back of her closet. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I wanted to read the thoughts of a woman I barely knew anymore. But curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through the pages. It wasn't what I expected. There were no confessions of guilt, no detailed plans of her illegal dealings. Instead, it was filled with her personal thoughts, her struggles, her fears, her feelings of inadequacy. She wrote about feeling trapped in a life she didn't recognize, about the pressure to maintain a perfect image. She even wrote about me, how she felt like she was drifting away from me but didn't know how to fix it. As I read through the entries, I realized something that hit me harder than any of the lies or betrayal. Rachel had been lost for a long time. She had fallen into something dark and dangerous, and while that didn't excuse what she had done, it made me realize that she hadn't done it just out of malice. She had been desperate, searching for control in a life where she felt she had none. It didn't make the pain go away. It didn't change the fact that she had broken our family apart. But it did make me see her in a different light. A flawed, broken person who had made terrible choices but wasn't entirely the monster I had painted her to be. Life moved on, as it always does. The trial date approached, and Rachel's face was all over the news. People talked about her everywhere I went. At work, in the grocery store, at the kids' school. They whispered behind my back, some of them offering pity, others judgment. I hated it, but there was nothing I could do. We were the scandal of the town now, and there was no escaping that. The day before the trial, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Rachel. She was in prison, awaiting her hearing, and this was the first contact she had made since her arrest. I hesitated to open it, unsure if I even wanted to hear what she had to say. But eventually, I did. The letter was short, just a few paragraphs, but it was enough to stir emotions I hadn't expected. She apologized, not for the crimes, but for the pain she had caused me and the kids. She didn't try to justify her actions. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She simply said she was sorry for everything. And at the end of the letter, she wrote something that stayed with me. I know I've ruined everything, but please remember the good times we had before I lost myself. I wasn't always this person. I hope one day, you and the kids can remember me for who I was, not for what I became. I folded the letter and put it away in a drawer. I didn't know if I would ever show it to the kids. Maybe one day, when they were older and ready to understand the complexities of their mother's choices. But for now, it was just a reminder that the person I had loved, the person I had built a life with, was still there somewhere, buried beneath the layers of deceit. The trial came and went. Rachel pleaded guilty to most of the charges, and with her cooperation, she avoided the harshest penalties. She was sentenced to several years in prison, but she wouldn't be gone forever. The thought of seeing her again one day was bittersweet. Part of me wanted to move on, to forget she ever existed. But another part of me, deep down, knew that no matter what, she would always be a part of my life. For now, though, it was time to rebuild, to focus on my kids and create a new life, free from the shadows of Rachel's mistakes. The road ahead was long, and I knew there would be difficult days. But as I looked at my children, I knew one thing for sure. We were going to be okay. As the months passed, life began to take on a new rhythm. I threw myself into work and spent every spare moment with the kids. We made a routine: Saturday movie nights, Sunday park visits, and weekday dinners that turned into little cooking adventures. I discovered the joy of being a single parent, and while it wasn't what I had imagined, it brought a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. The kids were resilient, surprisingly so. They adjusted well to their new life without Rachel, often engaging in imaginative games where they could be anything from superheroes to explorers. I was proud of them, but sometimes I caught glimpses of sadness in their eyes, little reminders of what we had lost. I was determined to keep their spirits high and make our home a happy one, despite the weight of our past. As I learned to juggle the demands of parenting alone, I found a support group for single parents in town. The meetings provided a space for us to share our struggles and triumphs, and it felt good to be around others who understood the challenges I was facing. One of the other dads, Mark, quickly became a close friend. He had 2 kids of his own and had gone through a messy divorce. We bonded over our shared experiences, and soon, we began hanging out outside the meetings, swapping parenting tips and venting our frustrations. One evening, as we sat on my porch sharing a couple of beers, Mark brought up the subject of dating. "You know, man, it might be time to think about moving on," he said casually, leaning back in his chair. "It's not easy, but you deserve to be happy." I chuckled, but the thought of dating felt foreign and daunting. "I don't know, Mark. I'm still processing everything with Rachel. I mean, what if I just end up getting hurt again?" Mark shrugged, his expression serious. "You won't know until you try. Just take it slow. It might help you to connect with someone who understands what you're going through." His words stuck with me. I hadn't even thought about dating since Rachel's arrest. I had focused solely on the kids and rebuilding our lives. But maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to think about my own happiness again. A few weeks later, I decided to dip my toes into the dating pool. I signed up for an online dating site, creating a profile that felt honest yet hopeful. I wanted to connect with someone who understood the complexities of life after betrayal, someone who could appreciate the ups and downs of single parenthood. It didn't take long before I matched with someone named Lisa. She was a school teacher in her mid-30s with a love for hiking and baking. Her profile was refreshing, filled with laughter and positivity, and when we began chatting, it felt easy and comfortable. We exchanged stories about our kids, shared funny anecdotes, and eventually agreed to meet for coffee. I was nervous the day of our first date. I put on my best shirt and tried to ignore the little voice in my head that told me to back out. After all, what if this was a mistake? What if I found myself in another complicated situation? But I pushed those thoughts aside and reminded myself that this was a chance to start fresh. When I walked into the cafe, my heart raced as I spotted Lisa sitting at a corner table, her face lighting up when she saw me. She was even more beautiful in person, her smile genuine and warm. We spent hours talking, and as the conversation flowed, I felt the weight of my past begin to lift, if only a little. Lisa had a way of making me laugh, and she listened when I shared my story. It was liberating to connect with someone new, to share my experiences without judgment. As our relationship grew, I introduced Lisa to my kids. They took to her instantly, charmed by her enthusiasm and kindness. Watching her interact with them was a joy. She had a natural ability to connect with children, and it warmed my heart to see them happy again. We spent weekends going on little adventures, hiking, picnicking, and exploring local attractions. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to build something positive from the ruins of my past. However, even as I embraced this new chapter, there were moments of doubt. I worried about whether I was doing the right thing by moving on, and occasionally, thoughts of Rachel would creep in. I often wondered how she was doing, what her life was like in prison, and whether she was truly remorseful for what she had done. I'd received updates through mutual friends, and while she was serving her sentence, I learned that she was taking courses and working on herself. It was a small comfort to know she was trying to better herself, but I couldn't shake the anger and betrayal that still lingered. One evening, after a family dinner with Lisa and the kids, I sat on the porch reflecting on everything that had changed. I could see how happy the kids were, how much they had adapted to this new life. And I thought about Rachel, who was now a ghost of the past. Someone who had made terrible choices, but who was also the mother of my children. I picked up my phone and opened the letter Rachel had written me months ago, the one I had stored away. As I reread her words, something clicked inside me. I had let go of the anger, the betrayal, and the hurt to an extent. I realized that while I would always have scars from what had happened, I could choose to focus on the future. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter back to Rachel. I didn't know if she'd ever read it, but it felt good to put my thoughts into words. I told her about the kids, how they were doing, and how I was trying my best to give them a happy life. I spoke about my decision to start dating again and how Lisa had come into our lives. I made it clear that while I couldn't forgive her yet, I hoped she would continue working on herself, for her sake and for the kids. The next day, I mailed it. As I dropped the envelope into the mailbox, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally found a sense of closure, a way to let go of the past while still acknowledging it. As I moved forward, I began to see my life taking shape again, one filled with laughter, love, and new memories. I learned that healing takes time and that it's okay to let go of the pain while still holding on to the lessons learned. I was on a new path, one filled with hope and possibilities, ready to embrace whatever came next. Rachel was part of my history, but she didn't define my future. That was mine to shape. And as I looked at my kids laughing and playing with Lisa in the backyard, I knew that everything was going to be okay. We had survived the storm, and now it was time to welcome the sunshine.